Chapter 14 Conclusion. Have we eaten on the insane root that takes the reason prisoner? William Shakespeare. Is there hope that the dreary situation in philosophy described in these pages could be changed for the better in the near future? And if yes, how exactly could the ideological unanimity and self-righteousness that accompanies it be undermined? Is there an antidote for those who have eaten on that insane root of liberal extremism and intolerance? Many are pessimistic. Some tend to despair. Maintaining that leftist orthodoxy is cemented in academia to such a degree that arguments can no longer work, and that it can now be attacked only with mockery and humor. I do not think this is the best, and it is certainly not the only way to respond. What then do I hope to achieve with this book? It would be naive, of course, to expect that it will have a huge impact on contemporary philosophers and their attitude toward politics. It is extremely hard to change people's way of thinking about these issues, especially when it has been widely shared and entrenched for a long time. Yet it would be sufficiently satisfying if the arguments presented here eased the grip of groupthink on philosophers at least a little, and if some of them woke up from what Francisco Goya strikingly called the sleep of reason that produces monsters. And why shouldn't they? For despite the enormous pressure of leftist orthodoxy, surely there are philosophers who would find the whole history of infamy presented here alarming, and who may conclude that the current ideological imbalance with all its excesses is intolerable. And if enough such people raise their voices, perhaps there would be some chance of change. But the step from becoming aware that a change is needed to publicly campaigning for that change and helping it to come about is not always as straightforward and smooth as some seem to think. When John Silber, former president of Boston University, was asked whether people in the position of making politically sensitive changes in higher education are scared of taking measures in this direction, he responded, "Many are. But ask why. They're not going to be shot at or put in prison. They're probably not going to be fined. They're not going to lose their jobs. Why does it take courage when there is no risk?" Silber was wrong, of course, and he knew it. No, the people he is talking about are obviously not afraid of being shot or being put in prison, nor are they afraid of immediately losing their jobs. What they are afraid of is their own colleagues. Making public statements that deviate from the dominant political views on campus carries the high risk of condemnation, isolation, and ostracism. Under the circumstances, the decision to keep silent does not look entirely unreasonable. Why speak your mind if doing so can lead to very unpleasant consequences, with little chance of any good ones? Sometimes, however, being silent is not enough to guarantee being left alone. One must also express support for the right causes and publicly condemn those who have gone over to the dark side. And many academics do accept this kind of herd mentality and are happy to join in denouncing the views the majority regards as unacceptable. Paradoxically, the academic environment in some communist regimes of Eastern Europe was in fact far more tolerant of challenges to the prevailing leftism than is the case with many of the best universities in the West today. In Croatia and other parts of former Yugoslavia, in the 1970s and 1980s, for instance, although a lot of professors, especially in the humanities and social sciences, were careerists or true believers who all vehemently opposed the slightest criticism of communism or socialism, there were nevertheless quite a number of others who were fed up with the officially imposed ideology and who were very glad to see an anti-Marxist article occasionally make it into print. So while the party sycophants would condemn the author of such a reactionary text, many of his own colleagues would pat him on the back. In contrast, try going to Harvard, Princeton, or Stanford nowadays and doing something equivalent, i.e., publicly attacking leftist sacred cows such as affirmative action, gay marriage, multiculturalism, feminism, social justice, etc. Remember that speakers with politically incorrect views sometimes need bodyguards during their campus visit. So the change of mentality will not come easily, and if it ever happens, it will take some time, and a lot of effort and persuasion. There are two main reasons why philosophy badly needs a recovery program. First, it is embarrassing for a discipline that advertises itself as a paragon of reason to have so many of its leading minds often champion nutty leftist views, including the support for the most appalling political regimes, while hardly any of their colleagues bat an eye. There are no enemies to the left, as the saying goes. Or better still, the implicit principle behind the philosopher's typical behavior appears to be leftist ideas should be endorsed or perhaps ignored if they become too extreme, but never criticized with the same intensity as conservative views. Here's a quick bullet point reminder of some of the many such examples involving the creme de la creme of contemporary philosophy. One of the leading logical positivists spends more than 2 years doing propaganda for Stalin while millions die in the government-caused famine. Reactions? None. One of the most highly esteemed philosophers joins a militant Maoist party and is very active in it for 4 years during the horror of the Cultural Revolution. Any interest among his colleagues in knowing more about the episode or understanding how this was possible? Non-existent. A hugely influential thinker describes in his autobiography and several interviews how he suspended his opposition to Hitler after the Nazi-Stalin Pact and then reversed himself miraculously on the day of the German attack on the Soviet Union. Reaction? Yawn. A person who is widely regarded as the greatest philosopher of the 20th century did basically the same thing. Ever discussed? Not really. A preeminent philosopher is knighted for service to philosophy and racial justice despite giving a platform at All Souls College, Oxford, to a notorious and vicious racist. Comments? None. Apparently, this is regarded as not worth even mentioning, or it did not register at all. A scholar in one of the top philosophy departments in the UK defends for years the brutal Soviet oppression of the Hungarian Revolution of 1956 as a completely justified response to a fascist rebellion. Response? A total lack of interest, followed by his being elected to the prestigious Chichel Chair of Political Theory at Oxford. A renowned philosopher of science was in his youth an ultra-Stalinist, as well as a police informer, and also gratuitously forced a young woman to commit suicide. Response? An attempt to distort some of these facts and present them in a positive light, plus naming a university building and the highest award in the field after him, and so on and so forth. There is another reason a change of heart in philosophy would be very welcome. Many people have lately questioned the wisdom of so much public spending for higher education, especially in the humanities. Ominously, it is philosophy departments that are often mentioned as the first candidate for cuts or even elimination when universities face funding problems. What is worse, some excellent and respected philosophers actually agree their departments should be high on the list for discontinuation. Were I a university administrator facing a contracting budget, I would not look to eliminate biosciences or computer engineering. I would notice that the philosophers seem smart, but their writings are tediously incestuous and of no influence except among themselves, and I would conclude that my academy could do without such a department. With such doubts about the value of philosophy gaining momentum, the last thing we need is to project a picture of a politically unbalanced discipline that is largely unaware of its unyielding leftist bias, and in which leading scholars have been for decades either rewarded for their unhinged ideological views or have encountered almost no opposition from their peers. As long as this situation continues, public announcements by philosophers that they teach students how to think critically and logically will inevitably ring hollow. But let me end on a positive note. Despite the fact that in philosophy, reason has so often gone on holiday, we may still be hopeful. As a friend of mine remarked, the word holiday implies that reason might come back.